Thanks. So, did you guys know that Carl's Jr. and Hardee's is the same place? It's like the same restaurant. It's just a different name depending on where you are in the country. That's a fact. Jace and I talked about that on the way to Chicago a couple weeks ago. Later he told me, like Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, he didn't say that part though, that I'm imposing the metaphor here. The characters in all his stories take one of two forms. A character is either intensely obese, or like Alberto Giacometti's Walking Man, very tall and very thin, with massive hands and feet. It's kind of weird, right? I don't know. But it seems to be mostly a visualizing technique for himself. I mean, you wouldn't get the gist of this from reading Jace's work, certainly. What you might gather is Jace's complete lack of awareness about that old maxim, write what you know. In the writing he's shared so far, just this semester and a half that we've known him, he's taken us underwater to run auditory experiments. We visited the set of a German film director, and we found ourselves in a desert landscape populated by secret servicemen masquerading as cacti. Sometimes it's like he shouldn't be able to pull it off, but then you start reading and watch as he does. Jace's prose is confident and inhabited, versatile as you can see, but also meticulous in its language and its detail. Wherever a reader might find him or herself at any time, what often grounds Jace's work and holds it all together is an immaculate ear for voice and the vernacular. In that way, his writing almost seems ready-made to be read aloud. Also, there are all those words that you've never heard of, and this way you won't have to worry about pronouncing them, because now he has to do that. Jace Brittain.
Thank you, Garrett, and thanks Gus and others for hosting this. Well, I'm a little sick and a little blind, but I'll do my best. If I fall down, call an ambulance, I suppose. Well, thank you. Thanks to the staff here for helping. This one's called Illumina Abysses. Yosef kicked his legs. Water, no joke, is too big. Yosef thought about kicking his legs, and his legs kicked. Ocean, no really, no joke, is too small. Yosef kicked his legs, or thought about kicking his legs, and his legs kicked some more as he held his desperate breath and followed a thick hose surfaceward, his hands guiding a blinded man out of a black blue. Yosef thought wrongly that he was emitting bright light from his eyes and his ears and the cavernous pores of his scarred face, and from the outie which punctuated his bare white whale belly. Bright light, he thought, like the enunciation, he thought. Angel Gabriel to swim out my mouth and deliver us from scars and bellies and blood flowing. And this transcendental itch, formication of the blinding white hot variety, the culprit, in other words, his skin, he hoped, he thought, might as well just crawl off of him and swim away and leave him to it, the ascent. I am the door to Osawa Tanner's awaiting virgin. Sun shining, just an idea down deep enough. Light is drowned by chaotic pressure in, to, from all directions at once. Darkness doesn't play any tricks. Things are invisible as ideas are down deep enough. Yosef's kicking legs, kicking in aquaspace, necessarily displacing. Displacing what or where? Width, breadth, just ideas oceanic. Itching occupies one's sanity. Other words, formication is real. Aha! Yosef kicked his legs, formo chaotically. Possession, ocean, breath, hissing, hose. Followed downward, opposite hero Yosef's vector, terminates at a coupling bonnet atop the small submersible vessel named Phosphorus Dub version. Dub, as the three aboard and the swimming one above call it, was an observational diving bell submersible before it was retrofitted and re-submerged as an anechoic chamber. Thus the acoustic damping tiles blocking the view from any of the three window porthole eyes, and thus the special pressure which maintains both hydrostatic and anechoic equilibrium despite The open entrance exit moon pool at the bottom, other words, keeps the waters and decibels low. The three inside sit in 3 of the 4 chairs arranged facing 2 by 2, fulfilling at present capacity only 2 by 1 beside null of the maximum. Ka usually leaves his feet wrinkle-raisening in the moon pool to break the surface tension and provide a little decibel-raising twinkling sounds so nobody loses their shit like they had when he had whispered, "Let's talk incantations." Nebracadabra, as thought by Mira, who wincing from Ka's whisper caused Ka and Bibi to wince too, and this wincing, which looks like winking, made some racket too. So Ka uncrossed his legs, put his back against the seat, and let his legs drop into the pool again, and in what felt like minutes long, the echoless twinkling water had established a new acoustic base, equilibrium adjusted and maintained. A few small incandescent lanterns hung in metal cage guards above their heads, but the hanging had been immobilized by duct tape because of squeaking. "Asi nisi masa," whispered Ka, only just heard by the other two over the ambiance of the twinkle and the sound of Bibi's previously deafening blood flow. "We gotta stay positive. Yasif will be at the surface in no time. He'll discover why we haven't been brought up and rectify these whistling sounds susurrously pushed through Ka's clenched dentures. Magic words comprise most deceptions. Everybody knows some magic words. The corpulent Bibi thought that wishful thinking would only get them so far, not far, and Mira heard this and rolled her eyes, which the incandescent light reflecting off the water made look bigger and bluer than they really were. Mira sat beside Bibi facing Ka with her knees drawn up to her chest in order to avoid touching Ka's wrinkly knees, which he slowly, carefully, quietly crossed to hide his growing affection for Mira, reminded to him by the rolling of her bigger, bluer eyes. Mira thought very quietly about Ka, a talented chemist and physicist and aeroacoustic engineer for whom she worked as a personal assistant. He was also totally oblivious and lonely leerer. To avoid audibly glowering at the decaying old creep, she mostly kept her eyes down. The more field experience, the better for her in her future, even if that field was this miserable, dank, echoless chamber. Why were they still down here? And Jesus, Ka wasn't so bad with his bulging, slack-jawed, drooling Dr. Bibi beside her. He was a supposedly great ornithologist, with enough knowledge to pass as a marine biologist along to say, that's a mollusk, or that's a fish, or that's an extremophile and a new fucking species. Fellow millionaires to be take wing against a sea of trebles, even though the supposed to take an hour tops expedition was intended as a sound experiment. Ka had insisted on bringing this jowling and prognathously mandibled, protruding teeth-chomping animal expert, like, just in case. Bibi packed his sausage fingers together in an alternating fashion called interlacing among less horizontal folk, and wiggled his wetsuit-footed toes on both of his feet, stretching out his legs and smushing his heels into the yellow padded seat beside Ka. Ka smiled dumbly at Mira. Mira gritted her teeth and did her best to turn her eyes backwards and into her head. BLOODFLOW, blood flow, blood flow. BLOODF, blood flow. I spelled that wrong, sorry guys. Hell's bells, lady, quit your goddamn witch chants. Beef seethed through his breath. Mira and Ka both winced. Mira raised one eyebrow as if to say, I didn't say a thing, fat man. Bibi exhaled heavily nasally as if to say, well, you must have thought it, witch. Wincing Mira raised one finger as if to say, cut witch from your thought vocab or else. Mira's apposio pieces hung heavy and, being echoless as everything else, left a plunging craterous silence which was then filled with the sound of Bibi's hungry heart pumping exasperatedly in order to fill the overwhelming orders demanded by his massively strained vein system, and the sound of the repeating chorus, the enchantation, which was actually a smirky pop song, still ringing Mira's formerly teenaged ears, and was now rolling from mine to mine in what seemed to be a shrinking submersible, a shrinking sub-BLOODFLOW, blood flow. The song slipped from her mind, crawled into BB's mind, who tried desperately to shake it out, succeeding both in increasing the volume of his own pumping blood and in skipping the earworm off the surface of the moon pool and into Ka's mind's ear. Ka accidentally hummed a little, and each of the trio convulsed, clutching his or her ears. The song bounced from ear to ear to ear to ear to ear to ear, and on, and steadily increased in volume. The notes were written on the subcutaneous tissue behind their forehead epidermis. The lyrics streamed out their ears, vapor given off from the music stomata of their pores. The vessel's pressure changed. The bass decibels dropped, and the ditty was deafening. They did their best to communicate through stymied whispers, BB like, "Shut the fuck." Mira, "Can't we do anything to make this more better?" Ka, "Some gradual adjustments to the quality and quantity and content." BB, "Shut the fuck." Mira, "Just do, BB, shut the." Ka, "Here goes nothing, he. Ka very slightly twisted the valve for helium, giggling, just imagining the hilarious and charming wit a higher frequency voice would allow him. "We are going to need a bigger boat. I'm a little teapot. Being or non-being, that is here, the frog, as to howness." Regarding pressurization and equalization, the hose and its associated valves, discs, bonnets, reliefs, springs, seals, caps, autocaps, anti-caps, bodies, holders, screws, vacuums, gases, canisters, banisters, autovalves, halves, levers, sprigs, sprinkles, reels, antibody taps, holders, and so on and so wide and so forth, is supposed to be all regulated by a computer and its human monitor at the topside termination of the old hissing hose toward which Yasif was swimming, toward which Yasif was ascending, and feeling any moment he would be free. Partial pressure diffusion drove rippling waves of oxygen between his skin and musculature, forcing carbon dioxide bubbles out, and up from his tear ducts and the space between his fingernail, toenail, hyponychium. I practiced that word and I messed up. Yasif's blood boiled his intestines and departed as plasma propulsion, every ion and on, accelerating, virtuo-oscillating electron-neurotically, unstopping, other words, his mortal coils fueled the light which propelled him. Yasif saw himself from all sides, reflected and refracted, a power whose only obstacle is water and air. I am water, and he is air, and I am air, and he is water. Yasif's hands and face were raised. The bubbling coming out of his ocular holes and from beneath his fingernails raced him toward the sky. Followed upward, the hissing hose terminates in a cluster of tanks aboard a ship-shaped floating production storage and offloading rig christened Venus. Aboard the vessel, the human monitor named Cecilia Byford, who once used the word desiderate with regard to Ka and her considerable yearning for him, she sat and read something she didn't understand, to wit, "The opposition of denominative function represents as the crow flies speech, self becoming primarily dream song in the poet's camera eyes, necessitating devotion to utter fiction's bovine virtuality. Second verse same as the first, becoming new yet totaled beyond the trauma wards. Eloquence surprises when the object named is a bathysphere." Perhaps a bad translation from the French, she thought. Malarmé, macramé, crochet, she thought as she applied the proper force to both handles of the large bushing shears in order to facilitate a scissoring diagonally across the inscrutable book. Chop. With some effort, the shears sliced through the text. She had been and was leaning precipitously over the railing, swigging a generic bottle of rum and halving the ship-shaped rig's library. She allowed the two imperfect halves of Malarcreme's book to fall over the railing. The partial spines fell fastest, most efficiently, and took certain words with them, while others unraveled the strung binding enough to flutter free for a second or two longer than those that were bound. Pages and parts of pages and prose, separated with the initial cut, distanced themselves, and each from the other luxuriously descending in flapping fits and starts, scooping wind and being scooped before eventually joining the already dampened and disintegrating paper, sinking beneath a broad swath of ocean surface. Cecilia grabbed another book and began to read. Now, the shadow of the column, she read, but stopped and chopped. Goodbye, Grillet, she sang, and made like she was waving, this is so convenient, made like she was waving a handkerchief. Bon voyage, don't forget to write. She grabbed another book, this one, another weighty technical tome, she thought, but not with particular focus on the nonsense in her hands. In fact, she was thinking about the wreck of her life aboard this awful wreck, the ship-shaped rig Venus. She was on a more or less indefinite furlough from progress towards listed desiderata, her own ship, her own crew, her own lover. An amorphous shape around pursuit paused permanently at a crewing geld, getting hired out on someone else's rig. Someone else who don't know or love the sea and nobody, but can foot the bills and pay hand over that foot. She thought for a moment that in the service of continued monetary income, she should probably cease obliterating the ship-shaped rig's mostly book-shaped library, swig from the bottle, chop of the book, another, chop and another, auf Deutsch, Franz, Chapka. Someone must have calumniated K, since unless otherwise he had really done something wicked, he was arrested one morning. K, Ka. A dark and mysterious past superimposed upon a friendly old man. She had found his records, most of which were redacted besides the arrest and the time of the arrest. Still, she loved him and desiderated, since desideration was the only explanation for the urine-shaped hole in her guts. She loved him, she loved the ocean, she loved him, she loved the ocean, she thought, as she sliced the pages and pages, which then feather fell circuitously down. She watched the white-black-gray shower of paper in silence. No, not in silence, rather in ee-roo, 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 ee-roo. The computers were a-buggin', the red lights were a-flashin', and the speakers were a-making that sound that shook her brain loose from its mooring. What the fuck? Some calamity must have visited Ka. And the others. The pressure was wonky, the gases jerry-riggered, equalization jicked, what the juck. How long had this been happening? The valves blurred and settled and blurred as she set two of what looked like four hands on the valve handles and watched their stems spin. Not so far down the honking, hissing hose's exterior. Yosef was gorging on particles of text. His teeth were inefficient sieves, irrelevant for an omnivore, letting pass Frau Montags, besides Monsieur Montags. Do you read what you eat? I do, and I am that which I consume incontrovertibly. I am Whitman's rainy-eroded particulars, Zola's toe jam dipped in streams, electromechanical manual, Ryder Zane's shallow dive, Crone's sailing accident, Gerondo's last swim, Crane's Caribbean cruise, Berman's cement diving slippers. Yosef reached the surface and breathed, and all his bright light poured out and escaped into the stars and the planets and the moon, pocking the night with his pock-scar rays, his cried particle tears, his whale white belly emission naval waves. He looked up at Venus, grasping with his violently shaking right hand the hose which hissed down to phosphorus dub version. Aboard the dub, the crew's short-lived experiments. The crew's short-lived experiments with helium had predictably been less of a diversion than Ka had hoped. Ka felt his hilarious quotes had been misheard at their high frequency. Bibi had screeched the words, warbled, shut, the, and fuck. Mira had arms wrapped around her chest-drawn knees and rocked back and forth, shaking her head. Though what a time for a diversion. And then one came, up through the moon pool. A fish appeared. It was large for a fish, medium for a dog, just floating on the surface of the moon pool. It had black eyes and long black eyelashes, magnificent fanned fins, and its mouth was a meshy crisscross of long, skinny, prognathous, sharp, tooth-like stems which began to draw open and suck in the interior light of the vessel from the incandescent lamps until all of the light shined out of its open mouth and the lamps hung dimly. Bibi let his legs drop in the water and leaned toward the fish with his hands out. I don't believe it, he said, and said, I just don't believe it. His helium-frequencied whine was remarkably clear. I don't believe it. Mira and Ka looked at each other, wide-eyed, and then back at Bibi. Bibi lifted the fish from the water and pulled it toward his own prognatheously protruding dental mess of a mouth until his lips touched and surrounded the mouth of the creature and eclipsed all light in the dub. High-frequency moans rang from cartoon ghouls in an almost complete dark. The only thing Ka could see was Bibi's orange, glowing cheeks. Ka didn't move a muscle. Mira didn't make a sound. An abrupt yerp preceded some splashing, and then it was just helium-high nasal breaths. Bibi? Ka whined in the dark. He couldn't see anything now. Uh-huh, Bibi said, and light emerged from his mouth and returned to the lanterns lining the top of the dub. Ka looked at Mira. Mira stared at her knees. Bibi spoke. That was an extraordinarily rare fish. Ka turned his attention back to the valves. The pressure must be slightly off or something. Perhaps only another minor adjustment. A touch to the right or a touch to the left. Flashing red. Ka tried to say, something's amiss, but his voice bleated out a calamity-howling saxophone. Bibi dropped his jaw to say, oh no, what's wrong? But what was wrong was apparent when his eyes popped and splattered, and his living guts were ejected through his gaping maw. Sorry, it's happening to me too. At last, his spine was ejected past his jutting prognathous mandibles before his entire body exploded in a red, white, and pink spray. Ka wiped BB bits from his face and looked at Mira, who was covered in blood and stuff, and clutching her head like perhaps she had been hit by a shrapnel tooth. She looked up at Ka with bigger, bluer eyes. He thought, looking desperate. He thought, like, what's happening? Help, Ka. She pleaded, he thought, with her bigger, bluer eyes, but then, pop, pop. Ka stared at eyeless Mira and felt devastation tear around his insides. And then he exploded. The combined concussive thrust of rapidly decompressed exploding human bodies extruded their icky Play-Doh remains out the circle bottom hole moon pool of dub. The dub's cables and hoses were suddenly stuffed and stressed to the point of severance, and the small vessel was cut loose. The lights were ejected but stayed lit long enough to illuminate what were mostly helium bubbles rushing out the top and bottom of the vessel. Sorry, I knew I wasn't going to sniffle into the mic, and then I did it. The lights were ejected but stayed lit long enough to illuminate what was mostly helium bubbles rushing out the top and bottom of the vessel, which was quickly filling with water as it spun wildly, propelled by the escaping gases. Dub disappeared into the abyss, invisible as ideas are invisible down there. Death, shake, rattle, and roll. Cecilia had been in some astronomically considerable sort of panic, but she had stopped still when she had seen the tall male figure striding across Venus's deck. The skinless man reminded her of the anatomical musculature models of high school biology. He left squishy red footprints where he walked. He had seen her, approached her. Cecilia, he had seen her, approached her, and said her name. Cecilia, he said. Ka, she said softly. Without answering, the man took both her hands, drew her in close, and led her into a waltz. While each step squished, he sang sonorously, sweetly, loudly, oh, what is the dark for? What is a lark for? Why are shady lanes? Why is a cozy corner so rosy every time it rains? Oh, what do we got me for? What do we got you for? Why are there stars above? You know, I know, everything's made for. Oh, Ka, what a croon you have. She squeezed his hand and red ran between her fingers. Ka. Yasif naively wondered aloud while biting the inside of his cheek. I am Ka. I am Yasif. I am Kafka, I am Zola, and I am Durando, and Mira, and Brecht. I am ocean waters, each and all. I am morning and evening. I am many Johns, and Felices, and Waltz, and Susans, and a few Weetolds, and Ernests, and Bibis, and Oliverios, and Chinuas, and Ralphs, and Mollys, and more Alphonses than I care to admit, and Hannahs, and Barbaras, and Georges, and Estrellas, and Voyniches, and Francises. I am, ich bin, je suis, soc, ako, ego, sum. I am Renee and Francis and Frank and Sam and Samantha and Francis and Francis and Shakespeare and Francis 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 and Francis.